Hi guys, it's ASBYT and welcome to a brand new video. Now, the launch of the much talked about Huawei Mate 30 Pro was a controversial one. On one hand, it was a brilliant phone, for sure one of the best of 2019. But on the other hand, the fact that Huawei were unable to ship the device with Google services meant the reach of the device outside of China was largely affected. Many of you guys who were looking at possibly buying the Huawei Mate 30 Pro have been left scratching your head with a little bit of a dilemma. Do you go out and buy it and hope that the political situations change? Or do you look for a replacement smartphone that has very similar features but doesn't quite have the same political problems that the Mate 30 Pro has? Well, if that's you, then this might possibly be the phone for you. Some of its features aren't as good as the Mate 30 Pro, but some of them are probably better. So without further ado, let's get to all the information right now. Let's go. So ladies and gents, this is the 5G version of the Vivo Nex 3, and it's got very similar features to the Huawei Mate 30 Pro. The design, for instance, with its 6.89-inch Super AMOLED waterfall display, it looks almost identical to the Mate 30 Pro, but without the notch, so some would argue it looks even better. So it does have a larger display, which is a plus for some people, but it is only a Full HD one and not Quad HD that we see on the Mate 30 Pro. Lower resolution, sure, but it's still a beautiful looking display with an integrated fingerprint scanner which is fast and accurate. Now, Vivo are able to offer this completely full screen display due to the front camera being concealed in the pop-up. This pop-up houses a 16 megapixel lens with f2.1 aperture and max video capture capabilities of 1080p at 30 frames a second. So similar video capture, but you don't get the same secondary time of flight camera on the front, which helps out with depth perception for all of your beautiful selfies. Having said that, the solitary lens does a pretty decent job, especially in good lighting. It doesn't produce the sharpest images, and there's a slight beautify mode attached to them. Some may like that, some may not, but the color temperature is pretty accurate and there are quite a few different settings that you can tweak in order to get your selfies in order. Next to that pop-up on the top, you also have a headphone jack. So for all you jack lovers, this is a better option than the Mate 30 Pro. The back looks pretty similar to the Mate 30 Pro as well, with its circular triple camera setup, a whopping 64 megapixel primary wide lens with f1.8 aperture, a 30 megapixel telephoto lens with f2.5 aperture, and a 30 megapixel ultra wide angle lens with f2.2 aperture. And again, the photos on the whole are very solid. Plenty of customization again to get the shots that you specifically want. As always, I love using an ultra wide lens. There does appear to be slight color temperature change between the different lenses. So when you go from ultra wide through to zoom, it definitely gets warmer as you go through. So that's certainly something they could possibly look at in the future. But again, in good lighting, decent dynamic range, it does a good job. You've also got different AI features and things like super macro mode. When we jump into low light, that's where you notice the biggest difference between the Vivo Nex 3 and the Huawei Mate 30 Pro. Most people would argue that the Huawei Mate 30 Pro is industry leading in this area, and while not terrible, you certainly do notice the difference in low light. Not quite as sharp, exposure issues sometimes, and just a little bit blurry as well, especially if there's a lot of movement. You can still snap some great shots at night, but you've got to be selective and you've got to work that little bit harder than you would on the Mate 30 Pro. Video capture on the rear is max 4K at 30, and again, in keeping with the camera as a whole, there are some good points and there are some sort of meh points. The picture generally looks pretty decent, the stabilization is average, and the audio is nothing really to shout home about. But remember, the Mate 30 Pro's video quality has got a few flaws as well. The camera quality as a whole isn't gonna outshoot the Mate 30 Pro, but within this price range, it does a decent job. Now on the edges, we have a very interesting feature that has been rumoured to come to many smartphones, but really has failed to materialise so far until now, and it's known as Touchsense. Basically, there are no physical buttons for power and volume rocker, etc. Instead, the function works using haptic feedback, and this again really adds to the immersive design. It's not perfect, and I personally don't see the problem with having physical buttons, but I like that Vivo are trying something a little bit new here. There are ridges on the actual power button, so you can actually feel it. You don't have to kind of go rooting around for it on the side. You know where it is, but the accidental touches on the power button are certainly more frequent than on a physical button. I find myself turning the display off more regularly than more often than a physical button. And the volume up is above that and the volume down is below that. Like I said, not perfect, but pretty cool at the same time. The bottom bezel houses the SIM card tray, speaker, which is only mono, and the Type-C charging port to charge the hefty 4500 mAh battery cell with the supplied 44 watt fast charger. So great capacity, and it charges pretty darn rapid as well. There's non-expandable 128GB of storage, UFC 3.0, 8GB of RAM, and it's running on the Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 Plus, all of which are in keeping with the latest 2019 flagship devices. It's got Android 9 with Vivo's FunTouch 9.1 over the top. I'm not a huge fan of the skin, but of course you can download your own launchers, for example, and customize it in your own way, like Nova Launcher, especially if you want that kind of more stock Android feel. Gestures on the whole work well. Swipe up from the bottom right to go back, up from the middle to go home, up from the middle and hold to go to recent apps, and up from the left to go to your settings shortcuts. Now this is one area of the OS that I think is a little bit of a strange one, considering pretty much nigh on every Android device has notifications and setting shortcuts when you swipe down from the top. Vivo's FunTouch just has notifications when you swipe down from the top, and it's taken me quite a while to get used to swiping up from the bottom left to go to my settings. So a few quirks aside, the Vivo Nex 3 is a very, very intriguing device. Obviously here in the UK, the global version would be better. I've got the Chinese ROM here, but that hasn't stopped me installing all of the Google apps for ease of use. And for around £700, link in the description, I think for everything you get, it's a very, very competitive device in that area of the market. But that's just my opinion, and I want to know yours. What do you think of the Vivo Nex 3? Is it a great replacement for the Huawei Mate 30 Pro, or are you pro, see what I did, Huawei Mate 30 Pro, and you're gonna go for that and hope the political situation will change? And do you think that situation will change in the near future? Like and share if you did enjoy this video and found it helpful. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you're new to the channel and want to be notified every time I post a video on anything tech, news, unboxings, reviews. I love you and leave you. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.